Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all tonight. I'm Tracy Frisch. I'm the founder of the Clean Air Action Network, previously known as Greater Glens Falls Wants Clean Air. Same sentiment, but we just thought a simpler name might be in order. And I'm very pleased to welcome you tonight for our first public education program. We were just formed in March, so a month and a half ago. So tonight we have with us Mike Ewald. He is the founder and director of the Philadelphia-based Energy Justice Network, a national network supporting grassroots resistance against dirty energy and waste facilities, notably biomass and waste incinerators, coal and natural gas facilities. He's been active since high school in 1990 and has led winning campaigns stopping numerous incinerators, power plants, landfills, ethanol, biorefineries, a coal-to-oil refinery, a liquefied natural gas import terminal, water fluoridation, a multi-state nuclear waste dump, and more. He has a very impressive record. I met Mike at a Alternatives to Incineration conference in Detroit in the 2000s. And his website is excellent, and if you want resources, they have great resources there. So he's done extensive work to document and expose environmental racism through local organizing campaigns and in demographic and mapping research nationally. He's also done much to critique the false solutions and harmful community impacts within most climate, energy, and waste policies, even carbon taxes, emissions trading schemes, fossil fuel divestment, and renewable portfolio standards. His long-term work against environmental racism in Chester, Pennsylvania earned him a tuition-free law school for activists scholarship to the University of the District of Columbia. So he's also an attorney. Since well before earning a law degree, he's been helping communities stop polluters with local ordinances such as the clean air ordinances he's been using to prevent proposed incinerators and crematoria. He's now working to use these ordinances to force the closure of existing waste incinerators and fossil fuel power plants. His zero waste hierarchy was used as the basis for the global standard set by the Zero Waste International Alliance. Several of us have been speaking to Mike since December when, during the comment period for Lehigh Cement to burn Raggertail, which is plastic, waste plastic and paper. So Mike has been extremely helpful, and it's for that reason I thought it would be great to bring him here. This program is entitled How Dangerous is Glens Falls Air? And it will include some discussion of what other communities are doing to reduce their pollution locally and to make their communities safer for human health. So without further ado, here's Mike, and he's going to do a PowerPoint, and then there will be questions. So if you want to write down your question during the thing, so during his presentation, so you remember, and we'll have time. We'll be here until 8:30. So thanks again for coming. If you have not given us your name and contact information, we'd really like to get that. That will allow us to communicate with you after the event. So during the program, I'll circulate a sign-in sheet on a clipboard, and you can put more information if you haven't. Thanks very much, and here's Mike.
Camera gonna see me? Great.
Yep.
All right, hi everyone. It's great to be here. First time in Glens Falls. Thank you for welcoming me. Yeah, Tracy's been great to work with. She reached out to me when I've been working with folks a little further south in Albany County. God, this cord is not very long, is it? And yes, I'm glad to be working with folks in this community. Because when I got started, I was still in high school. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and Wheelbrader, a familiar name here, was the first company I ever fought. Wheelbrader is a trash incinerator company, and they're also here in Hudson Falls, near here. So my life goal is to shut all the incinerators down in this country. I think we're going to pull that off. And there are 3 Wheelbrader incinerators and a now proposed Wheelbrader incinerator ash dump along the Hudson, and we're going to have to work on getting all those closed down. So you're in good company in that you have new folks that are newly looking to organize community groups in Poughkeepsie and Peekskill as well, where there are existing Wheelbrader trash incinerators. They also want to see them shut down. And the folks in Catskill fighting the ash dump that Wheelbrader wants to build to take the ash from here are also folks who will be happy to work in solidarity with you here. So we're all on one team. So I'm going to walk you through. I have a lot of slides here. Some of them I might breeze through, go a little fast. Slow me down if you need to. I do talk fast, so be warned. And definitely save up all your questions, write them down. Sometimes I'll take questions throughout. If it's like, ooh, it has to be asked now, I'll entertain some of that, but if it gets out of control, I might put a pause on that, because we'll never get through all the slides. So anyway, with that said, thank you for the lengthy introduction. Tracy, where'd you go, Tracy?
Oh, right.
Oh, hi. And we'll just start moving through this. So thanks everyone for welcoming me here. So you probably recognize some of these smokestacks. Glens Falls area does seem to have an air pollution problem from the numbers I've been looking at, and that problem has 3 names attached to it and 3 sets of smokestacks attached to it. So this is a lot to absorb in one thing, but I put this together and I'm going to try to walk you through this, because some people were saying, well, shouldn't we study this more? Do we know enough? Where's the air pollution really coming from? Well, we already have the answers. This is from Environmental Protection Agency. This is not perfect data. There are gaps in this data. I won't get into that. But this is the best data that exists on where air pollution is coming from. And you'll see on here, so the number, this is the one slide. I probably do need that laser pointer someone was offering me. If you do want to pass that up, that would be a good time for this. So on the top row, you see industry. So those are all the pounds of different pollutants coming from industrial sources in the 2 counties, in Washington and Warren County. You also see on-road, so those are the cars and trucks. Non-road is another set of mobile sources. So these are tractors, things that are on the construction vehicles, stuff on the sides of roads, or not really on the road, but they're still mobile sources. And these are cool, especially if you have animals. Okay. So the non-point, that is point sources is what they usually call, just renamed it industry because that's what it really tends to be. But non-point are things like buildings, home and commercial buildings, heating systems for the most part. And so usually those are pretty big sources. And usually we just look at the industry data, and then the industry will come back and say, well, cars and trucks are so much worse. Why aren't you focusing on them? And, sorry, well, baby didn't like that one. And so I decided we should look at all of it, just to be fully comprehensive here. Let's look at all of it. And in this area, perhaps because it's not as urban as other areas, the industry really jumps out. So the industrial share of pollution for all these things is actually pretty high. For some, it's as high as 97% of the lead is from industry. 91% of the hydrochloric acid, 91% of the cancer-causing chromium-6 is from industry. And the share of industries, like you have 22 industrial facilities between the counties that are listed in this EPA data. And Finch Paper jumps out as the largest source. Lehigh Cement and Wheelbrader's trash incinerators, the second and third largest sources. All the other industry combined is a very small portion of all the air pollution you're seeing between the 2 counties. Those big 3 companies, this is including all sources. So we're looking at 85% of hydrochloric acid from all sources, including cars and trucks and home heating systems and commercial buildings. 85% is from these 3 companies. 78% of the sulfur dioxide, which causes respiratory problems, acid rain, heart attacks, and strokes, 78% from 3 companies. So this is huge. I mean, 50% of the arsenic, 58% of the lead. I mean, this is 83% of the mercury. So to think that we don't have enough answers already to take action would be silly, because when you have data like this, even though there are some gaps in it, even though the gaps are actually ones where the industry numbers are probably higher than what I'm showing you here, and I'll explain later why that is. But there's no reason not to act based on having this information already. And so that's why we put this slide together. So I understand some of the community have been talking about, well, why don't we study this more? Why don't we get air monitors? Well, one reason is that we don't need another study to tell us what is already in our face. And there's this data that is already EPA data that's been out for several years. We also should not be studying something when we have enough evidence to act. Studies are great, but studies don't fix the problem. Studies just give you more information. More information is always helpful, but we don't need more information to be able to act on what we can clearly see as a trend. Now, in cigarette smoking, it was decades before they knew exactly how cigarette smoke caused cancer. Decades before they knew that mechanism, the Surgeon General put warnings on cigarettes because there were enough dead bodies that had lined up that they can see that there's a trend here. There's enough evidence that even though they didn't know how it happened, they knew, well, we need to do what's called the precautionary principle. We have enough evidence of harm that we should take action, even though we don't have certainty. That's what the precautionary principle means. And so thousands, tens and probably hundreds, maybe millions of people's lives have been saved because they took action to warn people before they knew exactly what was going on. So I think we know enough to act already. Now the big 3, Finch paper, paper mill is 55%. This is just of the industrial share now of the pollution. This is if all pounds are equal. Now we know all pounds are not equal. 1 pound of mercury is huge, whereas 1 pound of nitrogen oxide is not going to do much damage. It's usually in big numbers. But if you just add it all up in order to get a big picture, all the pounds of pollution from industry between these 2 counties, 55% of that pollution from those 22 companies is Finch Paper's pollution. 28% is the Lehigh Cement Kiln, and 7% is the Wheelwright Hudson Falls Trash Incinerator. It's a sort of small trash incinerator compared to most. And 19 other industrial facilities combined total 9%. All right, so we're going to focus a lot of this presentation on trash incineration. And you might think, well, didn't Mike just say that these other things are much bigger? Why are we focusing on trash incineration? Well, part of the reason is that there are ready alternatives. This is an old facility that is likely to shut down soon anyway, and it's the most winnable. It's not like it's unreasonable to think that you should be looking for alternatives to this and shutting it down soon, like other communities are doing. There are not that many jobs there. With paper mills, with cement kilns, you still have the issue of, well, maybe the product is still needed. Now, there is a huge paper mill in Maryland that just closed because there's not a demand for the product. So you might see large facilities like that close on their own, but no one in this community that I've heard from so far is campaigning to close down Finch Paper or to close down Lehigh Cement. The issue is more one of, should they be burning waste or should they be burning conventional fuels? And that's a battle you may want to engage in, as many other communities are doing. But the incinerator is something that there's a very clear case for why that should be simply closed down. And I want to make that case to you in this presentation. And we'll talk a little about the other facilities, but we'll mostly be focusing on trash incineration here. And that website there is where you can get a lot more information. You can get an older version of this PowerPoint that has not the local specific slides, but a lot of the other content and a lot of other resources you'll find on that page. All right, so this is a map of where the trash incinerators are in the US. Do you see a trend? Yeah, so I'm usually living in this part of the cluster or this part of the cluster. I'm kind of back and forth a lot, but this here is the priority to get all these out of here. Florida's got the most incinerators of any state, but New York is second with 10 trash incinerators in New York State. So that's a lot. It's a lot for one place to have. It's unusual to have trash incinerators. Most of the country, most of the world doesn't use trash incinerators, but we've been sold a bill of goods many years ago. A lot of gullible community leaders went for it, thinking that this was a solution, and now we're stuck with these antiquated, very polluting machines. The good news is that a lot of these have been shutting down, partially because of activism, partially because just their own economic weight they're crumbling under. And so I keep having to update this slide and take markers off of it, which is a wonderful thing. So I think 2 of them are on the slide that already need to be removed. Detroit and one in New York just shut down in the past month. So that's not accounted for in this slide yet either, I don't think. But there are about 72 trash incinerators now, if we count those latest closures. You'll see there was a peak of about 180, almost 190 around 1991, and the numbers keep falling. They have not managed to build a new trash incinerator at a new location in this country since 1995. They did build one new one next to an existing one in Florida in recent years and rebuilt and expanded some, but community opposition to this industry is so intense. Anywhere they try to go, people fight them because it's one of the most unpopular technologies in the world. It's up there with nuclear power in terms of if you try to build it in any community, people will figure out this is something that they don't want and they will fight it off. So let's look at the lifespan of incinerators, because yours is right at the prime here. Most of them don't make it past 30 years. The industry I've seen brag recently, oh, well, these can last 40 years. There's one in Saugus, Massachusetts that's 45 years old. And that's true. It's had holes in the roof and had to be repaired a lot. And there's one in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania that also had to be completely rebuilt in order to survive past his 40th birthday. But for the most part, they don't make it much past their 30s. And this one's already 28 years old. That's the average lifetime of when I last put this slide together. It was 76. Still operating in the country, and the average lifetime of them was 28 years old. So this is already at the point at which they tend to be closing. The ones that have been closing since 2000, their average lifetime is like 21 years old. So it's at the point where it's not worth investing in keeping this machine going when it's going to keep getting more expensive and falling apart, as a lot of them are doing. All right, now I like that this slide is not readable. This is just a list of victories in about a 5-year span of groups within our energy justice network that were defeating proposals for trash incinerators, poultry waste, wood incinerators, other types of dirty energy and waste facilities that are incinerators of some sort. And there were about 40 defeated just in that span of about 5 years. I haven't kept as good track since then, so I'll have to update this slide at some point, but that trend has definitely continued. And some more encouragement here is that when I looked at just ballpark numbers here, going back to the 70s of different waves of industrial development, and here I just look clear this time. Fun stuff. Here we go. So since the 70s, they were trying to build, Nixon talked about 1,000 nuclear reactors by year 2000. They got 116 of them built, and now they're in the 90s. And if you look at each of these waves of development, you'll see they tried to build something on the order of 1,000 trash incinerators. It's hard to get good numbers on that. But they only got up to nearly 200, and now this green bar, the number still operating is even shorter. And industry by industry, you see this. So a lot of times people think, well, grassroots community groups, NIMBY groups, not in my backyard groups, they're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. They're just pushing things to more vulnerable communities when they stop there, and that is not true. What we're actually doing is we're turning grassroots community groups, like the one forming here, into not in anyone's backyard groups, NIABI, because we get it. We understand that it's not simply we push it out of here and some poor black community gets stuck with it. No, we work with that community too, and we make sure that technologies that aren't good enough for our community don't end up anywhere. And that's what we're doing, industry by industry. We see entire sectors of dirty energy and dirty waste facilities that are proposed, and between 50 and high 99% of them, in the case of trash incinerators, is the 99%, are defeated one community at a time. Because groups like your own get together, fight them off, and support other communities to do the same. It's not big groups that you get mailings from and write checks to NRDC and such that are lobbying in DC, changing rules. That's not how it's happening. It's groups like Cleaner Action Network that are fighting one community at a time, but working with us and others to support that are making dents in shifting entire industries. It's huge. And there's just not an appreciation of that, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Okay, so the names they use for incinerators, you'll notice that there's a language battle that goes on in this thing. And I know I've been talking to the reporter about that here, and others, often the industry is pushing back and saying, well, these are waste-to-energy facilities, or now in some cases they call them energy from waste facilities. And when I first got involved, about 30 years ago, they called it trash to steam. I thought it was a good thing. Who wouldn't want to turn trash into steam? I mean, steam is just like you go in the shower and you have steam and you can breathe that, it's fine. And we're not just throwing ice cubes in the trash can though, so that's not actually what's coming out of the smokestack. But when I read about it in the newspaper, I thought, well, that must be a good thing. And I didn't know any better. I was in high school, there was no internet yet, I didn't have a way of knowing otherwise. But they use these terms to confuse you on purpose. They're misleading on purpose. No one's turning trash into energy. That violates the laws of physics. But they use that to make you think that you can turn bad things into good things and not into worse things, which is what they're doing. So there are other names for different types as well. We don't have to get into all those because you're not facing them here right now. But let's drill into these. So trash to steam is not what's happening, because it's not just water vapor that comes out of incinerator smokestacks. So I call them trash to toxic ash and toxic air emissions facilities, because that's honestly what they are. They turn, for every 100 tons of trash you burn, you get about 70 tons of air pollution. You're basically landfilling in your lungs, the air we breathe. And the other 30 tons become toxic ash, which still has to go to a landfill. It doesn't disappear. It's not an alternative to landfills. You just get smaller, more toxic landfills. They're not waste to energy either. We call them waste of energy facilities, actually, because if you take the same materials you're putting in them, which are mostly compostable and recyclable materials, and you actually compost and recycle them, you save 3 to 5 times more energy than you can get back by burning it. And where's paper? Can I have a piece of paper? Represent visuals here. Great. Blinding myself. So this paper, to make this piece of paper, you have to cut down trees using fossil fuel chainsaws or machines. You have to ship them to a paper mill and burn whatever finished paper might be burning to power that mill. I'm not sure, but often fossil fuels, sometimes tires. And then you have to ship it to a staple store somewhere to market it. And all the energy that came out of tailpipes and smokestacks is not physically present in the paper anymore. It's called embodied energy. It's the energy it took to get to here. You can't get that energy back by burning it because it's not in here. But if you burn it, you have to go through all those steps again and recreate it. Whereas if you recycle it, you can short circuit that. You can skip a lot of those steps and save that energy. And that's why we call them waste of energy facilities, because we'd rather save that energy and do the right thing. Okay, so I kept this slide in because it's related to the Wheelabrator company. So Waste Management, when I first got involved, they owned Wheelabrator, and Waste Management is the biggest waste corporation in the world. Wheelabrator is the second largest incinerator company in the country, and they were sold off in 2014. They actually got sold again just a few months ago. So not sure why they keep getting sold, but maybe it's because they're not so profitable. But Waste Management, the biggest waste company in the world, started realizing, apparently in 2014, that this is not a profitable industry to be in, and they moved away from other incinerator-like investment opportunities they had as well. Sold them all off. Except for the trash burning of cement kilns thing. That loopy idea of theirs still makes economic sense to them, so watch out for that. I mention that because there are actually threats in this region. So what brought me to this region of New York was when Connecticut first reached out to me. We have a member group in Hartford, Connecticut called the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice. And they've been fighting a trash incinerator that's the biggest polluter in their city for many years. And it's very old, and it's literally falling apart. This past year, they just shut it completely down because both of its generators failed. And So they were looking, the state of Connecticut, which is a state-run plant, they were looking at alternatives, and one of the main alternatives they wanted to do that was being seriously considered was to ship it to Albany County, New York, and burn it in a cement kiln at Lafarge. And that's what brought me to Albany County. And as some of you may know, Albany County, a majority of their legislature, over the Christmas holidays in 2017, and a majority of the local town board in the town of Queens, and a majority of the Village of Bravina officials, all went on record within that Christmas holiday time. They took time away from their families and they signed things and said, no, hell, way, got that backwards, no way in hell. They basically said to Connecticut, we're not doing this. And they put it in writing and they had press conferences and made a big deal about it. And the company backed off right away. And they put ads in the paper and they said, no, we were never thinking of doing this. Of course, their name was written in a proposal that got erased from later in Connecticut, but it was in writing that they were trying to burn trash in New York from 70 Connecticut towns for years to come. The cement industry is moving in this direction, and the waste industry is moving in this direction too, because they know that they can't get new incinerators built. They know that people are fighting them. They know no one likes landfills either. And cement plants, well, they don't like paying for fuels if they can get paid to take waste. And so that's what Lafarge was looking at. Later, Lafarge was saying, well, we don't want to burn trash. We really want to burn tires. And they got super excited about burning tires, and they had a state permit for this, and they really pushed hard, and the local government said, hell with that. And they hired me to write a clean air law that they passed in March, and that law effectively bans Lafarge from burning any kind of biomass or waste. And so this is a precedent, the first one in New York, to where local government actually drew the line and said, we're going to use the powers we're given under state and federal law to set a higher bar in terms of protecting air quality. And they did that, and now the company's trying to take over the town in the elections, and we'll see about that, but that's their next step. So not far from there, in Rensselaer, there's a company now that wants to take trash from the Albany region and compost it, they're saying, but really turn it into pellets to then market to cement kilns to burn. In this case, the ones in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, instead of just going across the river to Lafarge, because that's not allowed anymore. Now, if I'm in my home state of Pennsylvania, effective in stopping the cement kilns there from taking this trash, don't be surprised if they go even closer to home and say, hey, Glens Falls area, we got a cement kiln here, why don't we burn trash here? That's their business model. So you can easily be next. You can be part of their business model. We just don't know about it because maybe it just wasn't in that news article. So keep an eye on that. All right, moving on. So the basic lessons with incineration. I call it garbage in, garbage out, and not just in the literal sense, but if you put mercury in an incinerator, every bit of that comes out. If you put chlorine atoms in an incinerator, every bit of that comes out. It comes out in a combination of the air and the ash. It doesn't turn into energy, it doesn't magically disappear. It comes out into the environment that we're living and breathing in. And so don't think that there's magic going on, even though they have pollution control devices. All that does is take some of the crud out of the air and put it into the ash, making the ash more toxic. Now, nothing is 100% either. So when they say, well, we're capturing 90 whatever percent of a certain pollutant, well, it's never 100%. And small amounts matter. So if it's a small percentage of a big number of many, many tons per day they're burning, it's 500 ton per day plant, then it doesn't take much mercury to be damaging the brains of infants, to be making fish too toxic to eat. The amount of mercury they put out is enough to make sure that the fish in this region are too toxic to be safe to eat. Many, many times over. Actually, there's a study from Minnesota that's highly cited that says that if 1 gram of mercury is deposited over a 20-acre lake each year, then that's enough to keep the fish so toxic you can't eat them. The amount of mercury coming out of these 3 plants combined is 53 pounds a year. That's 24,000 grams. That's 24,000 20-acre lakes of fish you can't eat, coming from the 3 facilities in this area. So when they say, we have pollution controls that take out the mercury, this is after that. So don't buy it. Now, I'll skip over some of these last points here. Cover some of this. All right. So I've been making the claim that trash incineration is the most expensive and polluting way to manage waste or to make energy. The industry's own mouthpiece has admitted on the record that I'm right on half of those points. In 2013, Ted Michaels, who is the president of the Trade Association for Trash Incinerators, we were sitting at the same table before Washington, D.C. City Council when they were considering building an incinerator, which we stopped. And this is a direct quote. I watched the video many times to get it exact. And he calls it waste energy, of course. But he's basically saying here, yes, if you have an incinerator near a landfill, the landfill is going to be cheaper. This is true across the country. This is not even disputed. There's another industry trade association, the Solid Waste Management Association, that has looked at this as well, and they found across the country that tipping fees at incinerators are consistently higher than those at landfills. So this doesn't make economic sense. No one's doing this because it makes financial sense. So we can end that discussion because if the two industry trade associations admit it, then there's not much of debate. Now, on energy, they love to say they're energy facilities, not waste facilities. Well, if they're energy facilities, we think, well, what's the best way to make energy, or electricity in this case? No one thinks trash incinerators. And this is why. This is the federal government's data on the cost of different types of energy. And whether you're looking at the cost to build or the cost to operate and maintain it, trash incineration is the most expensive way to do either one. So no one thinks we need power, let's burn trash. That's not how it works. They're building them for other reasons. But what's most amazing about this is that it shows the difference between energy and waste. Sorry, fuels and waste. A fuel is something you pay to get, whereas a waste is something you get paid to take. Now, trash incinerators, their fuel is waste. They get paid per ton to take trash, and yet their operation and maintenance costs are still higher, much higher, than any of the things that are paying to get coal, oil, gas, uranium. And a lot of that's because the pollution control devices are a very expensive part of their plant, and other facilities don't have to have as many of those. And even with those, they're still dirtier than coal, which we'll get into in a minute. So economically, incinerators are very expensive, and because of that, they require monopoly contracts. They require that you have contracts with your local governments that say, you give us a certain amount of trash, and if you don't, you pay us anyway. You do have that problem here, yes. And I believe that's part of the reason why it has such a financial crisis with this incinerator over the years. I know in Claremont, New Hampshire, there are actually 29 towns that filed for bankruptcy because of put-or-pay agreements with that incinerator. That was a Wheelbrader plant that thankfully is now shut down. And the judge didn't let them go bankrupt. They were forced to pay up. So when you have this kind of contract, it's a disincentive to do the right thing. If the local government decides, well, we want to reduce, reuse, compost, recycle, or even if you're just losing population and you don't have as many people making as much trash, then the local government has to pay for the recycling and pay for the incinerator for services that it's not using. Yet Wheelbrader can turn around at the same time and say, well, let's take more New York City trash and fill it up and get paid twice for the same capacity for filling it up literally and then filling it up with your dollars figuratively for stuff that you're not using. So it's a great business model for them, but terrible for communities and for doing the right thing. So they compete with zero waste approaches. They also, in some states, compete with the clean energy alternatives. Now, yours is a very exceptional state. New York, 3 times this industry tried to say, we want to be considered renewable energy so we can get renewable energy credits that other states give their trash incinerators. Your State Department of Environmental Conservation, I'm not going to sing their praises in general, but on this point they were amazing. They put out a document that showed how your trash incinerators, the 10 of them in New York State, are dirtier than your 8 coal power plants, even when you adjust them for their size and do it in pollution per amount of energy coming out. On all these different measures they looked at, far filthier, even though they're newer and have additional pollution controls than coal plants do. And that information was used to beat back attempts by the state to give them renewable energy credits. So thankfully they're not getting that, but they keep trying. They actually, further south in the Hudson, There's a proposed incinerator in Orange County that's been on the books for years, trying to get built. And NYSERDA just gave them Tier 1 renewable energy credits for a plant that's not even built yet. And that is the first foot in the door for this industry. And so that's something that we all need to beat up the state over, get our state legislators involved in, and say, what in the world are you thinking? Because they're going to come after us and subsidize us next if you let them get away with this. All right, moving on. So they compete with recycling not just with the contracts, but they need some of the same materials that burn well. And interestingly, and I should update this slide, there's so much more plastic in the waste stream in recent years that they're actually going in the other direction. I toured a Wheelbrader incinerator in Baltimore, and they confessed to me that they're cool with recycling. They actually compete more with composting, they told me, because the boilers are rated at a certain amount of BTUs, energy value, per hour. They can only put so much energy value through them. So if they get too much plastic, well, they can't take much more waste because they hit that limit. So they would rather have the wetter stuff, like the compostables that should be, like your food scraps, composted. They would rather have that because then they can shove more tons through their burner and get paid more per ton. And their competitors, Covanta, basically admitted the same thing this past year when they were did a whole PowerPoint where in part of it they were talking about how they love plastic recycling. They don't want as much plastic because they're running into the same problem. Okay, so incinerators burn money. I mentioned Claremont already, they're on here, and you'll notice Hudson Falls. Also, deep incinerator debt due to long-term contracts that are favorable. Also, Harrisburg and Detroit faced bankruptcy because of incinerators. I actually worked on Harrisburg intensely from 2000 to about 2003. And I did a whole economic presentation because they didn't care about the fact that they were the most toxic incinerator in the country for many, many years. They ignored all that information. They had people from the indigenous communities in northern Canada writing to them saying, you're the largest source of dioxin in our food web. Can you please knock it out? Totally ignored that. So I'm like, all right, let's talk dollars and cents. I broke down all their numbers and showed how their consultants were lying to them, how they're going to lose money. This is in 2003. And they ignored me and went ahead and went into all this debt. Anyway, 8 years later, after I told them, after every slide, I'm telling you this will put you into bankruptcy. And I'm on the record saying that, they went bankrupt. Capital city of Pennsylvania. So, other economic points, jobs. They love to wave the jobs flag. They don't create many jobs. Landfills and incinerators, you get about one job for every 10,000 tons of material processed per year. With recycling, you get 10 times that. And with certain types of reusing materials, you get up to 300 times that. This slide here is the same thing. These are material recovery facilities or recycling sorting centers, 10 times as many jobs. But things like computer reuse, almost 300, and other ones in between. So this is not about jobs either. This is actually job destroying, because if you get rid of this, you get more jobs and alternatives. Even if all they do is landfill. A newer study of this in Maryland found there's a slight difference between incineration and landfill, and you get about 83% more jobs, so almost twice as many jobs with landfills as you do with incinerators. All right, so trash incineration is also dirtier than coal. This is national data, except for a couple of these pollutants is just statewide in Maryland, because I had data on that from that. But the other ones, I used EPA data, and I showed that for all these different pollutants, even though the coal plants don't have the more modern controls that trash incinerators do, the coal plants are less dirty. Now, we know coal is filthy. I hope that's widely understood. I'm not promoting coal by any means. But trash is even dirtier. So we just need to understand this and not let them get away with this notion that there's somehow a clean alternative. Was your hand up, or are you trying to? Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, so when I confronted the industry with this information at that hearing I mentioned earlier, the mouthpiece for the industry couldn't get around it. Usually they love to say how their power plants, they especially like that because it gets them renewable energy subsidies. In Maryland, it got them the permission to try to build the biggest one in the country within a mile of a school, which is illegal, but if they're a power plant, it's legal. So when it's convenient to them, they're power plants. But then when I say, well, let's compare to coal power plants then, just like New York State did and found trash incinerators to be dirty. Then all of a sudden they backpedaled and it was like, no, well, that's not a fair comparison. So it was interesting. So that's when I got this quote out of them. They say, well, electricity is a secondary function. We're primarily waste facilities. So when you compare them on global warming as well, they're 2.5 times as bad as coal. Now, they will claim that they're a global warming solution. They're very creative in their accounting on this. This is EPA data if you actually use it honestly and do a fair comparison and don't go through all the acrobatics they go through to try to make that tall line negative. But they do a lot of things, like they'll take the biogenic portion, they'll say, well, the amount of stuff that came from trees and paper, well, that's actually like 2/3 of it, and all that doesn't count because, trees regrow. Well, that's been scientifically debunked many times, because that's double counting. It's already accounted for that trees are growing, so you can't count it again by pretending that it's not actually in the air. The sun's rays don't go through the atmosphere and interview each CO2 molecule and say, did you come from a tree? Oh, yes, I did. Oh, I won't heat you up then. It doesn't work that way. So we don't have time to pretend that somehow there's this magic tree carbon that doesn't get heated up by the atmosphere. We also can't play games and say, well, we're going to subtract the worst thing in both the energy and the waste sector. We're going to subtract the emissions from landfills, we're going to subtract the emissions from coal plants, and get to this negative number, which is just this mythical thing they make up. So they have a lot of good propaganda out there, but it falls apart if you just ask them basic questions or use honesty or anything of the sort. Okay, so moving on. Dioxins. How many of you've heard of dioxins, right? Where have you heard of this from?
Coming from the plants.
New plants. Right, it's coming from the plants. A lot of you may have also heard about this from Vietnam, from Agent Orange, because there was a contaminant in that, and a lot of people came home ill from that. So dioxins are the most toxic chemicals known to science that are human-made. There's botulism and some natural things that are actually technically more toxic, but dioxin is right up there. And it's not made on purpose, it's made accidentally, mostly from burning things, mostly in combustion processes like trash incineration. It used to be that trash and medical waste incinerators were the largest sources. Burn barrels are now one of the largest sources. And it's not because of industry good graces that they got better, it's because regulations forced them to reduce. It's because over 6,000 medical waste incinerators shut down in the past 30 years, and a lot of trash incinerators too. So they're not the top sources anymore, but they're still big in local communities like this. And if I put a full list of all the things that it did to your health, you will not be able to read it because there will be so many words on this slide, but these are some of the bigger things that it's known to cause. And most of your exposure to it is not from living around here breathing the air. It actually hits people all over the place, and it does it through our food. 93% of the dioxin that we get exposed to comes through eating meat and dairy. So at dinner, some of us met earlier, and I'm the token vegan at the table. And this slide, which I saw about almost 20 years ago, is what got me to go from vegetarian to vegan once I realized where the most toxic stuff I've been fighting much of my life is actually getting to us. Now, there's a film called What the Health that came out a couple years ago. Who's seen that? Anyone? Some hands. It's on Netflix, so you can watch it if you're on that. And I'm actually in there for a couple of minutes, and I talk about this topic. And what struck me about this is how effectively some toxins will climb up the food chain. So you're in an area where there are probably a lot of dairy cows. Yes. There are probably a lot of beef cows. People are raising chickens, maybe fish, I don't know. And we all know, well, mercury ends up in fish, right? Well, why does that happen?
Food chain.
It climbs up the food chain, it bioaccumulates, and it does that, it comes out of the smokestack, it's not in that form where it's climbing up the food chain yet, but as soon as it hits a water body, microbes get it, and then it becomes methylmercury, and then it loves fat. And it climbs up the food chain and concentrates in fish. So that's why you see it in fish, not in other things. But dioxin comes out of the smokestack already fat-soluble. EPA calls it lipophilic and hydrophobic, which means it loves fat and it hates water. And it comes out that way right out of the smokestack. And if you are standing in a farm field next to a grazing cow, it will take you 14 years to put as much dioxin into your body from breathing as the cow will ingest in one day of grazing. And it's the dioxin just settling on, it's not accumulating in the plants because it doesn't like water, it's just sitting on the leaves. And the cow puts a lot of that in its body each day, eats a lot more than we do, and it sticks in their fat. And if you eat meat or dairy products, you're putting yourself higher on the food chain, it accumulates in your fat. And if you have a baby, that baby is even higher on the food chain, so to speak, because dioxin can cross the placenta and comes out from the breast milk, which means babies get the highest impact of the most toxic chemicals known to science, which mostly come from things like incinerators, in infancy. In that infancy period, you get about 1/6 of your lifetime dose of dioxin. And that's because women have those two ways of getting dioxin out of your body. Men, we don't have that. We just build it up and can't get rid of it. So there's no good way out of this other than stopping the sources. They already have the filters that remove dioxins from the smokestacks. Their standards are not as good as they could be, but if they put more of the pollution controls that reduce it, it actually creates more dioxins just transferring it to the ash. So you end up with a more toxic ash dump. There's no good answer for this other than not burning stuff. And if we want to have babies that aren't getting all kinds of immune system diseases, sexual reproductive disorders, endometriosis in older people, a lot of health problems that are coming from this, we have to hit it at the source. Because otherwise we're talking about, well, at what point do we tell women it's not safe to breastfeed and no one's going to go there because that's too controversial and breastfeeding is natural and supposed to be good, but it's also harmful at the same time. It's hard things to discuss. Okay, we won't get into all the chemistry of this. We can do that another time. All right, so one of the things that we had in our clean air law that we passed in the town of Queens, and also in the Baltimore Clean Air Act that we recently passed, which Wheelbrader is suing over now, which I'm very excited about, because we're going to beat them in court and set a good precedent. But these laws require that they use continuous emissions monitors for 20 different pollutants if they're going to be burning waste. And the reason why I have this analogy up here is because they're not usually using them. You might think, has anyone ever toured Wheelbrader? A couple people? So I've toured several other Wheelbrader and other incinerators, and in their control room, it's like NASA. You see all these monitors, and you think they really know what they're doing. They have all these graphs and stuff and numbers. They must really have an understanding of what's coming out of their smokestack. And then when you just look at some of the public records, you realize, well, gee, what are they continuously monitoring? Because the song and dance, they tell you, makes you think that they really know what's going on. They'll tell you, any facility with a smokestack will tell you the same story. I talk to people, they can call me up from like Kansas and say, well, they're trying to build this thing on, and I'll say, well, did they tell you this? How do you know? It's the same line everywhere. They'll tell you, don't worry, we have continuous emissions monitors, and we know what's coming out of our smokestack at all times. And the state has this data, and they will make sure that we don't go over the limits, and they'll fine us very heavily if we do. And if we go, since we'll be within the limits, you don't have to worry because the limits mean that it's healthy and safe. Has anyone heard this? I hear a lot of groans. Is this familiar?
Well, they just say, we're within EPA regulations.
Right. They say, well,
They didn't say healthy. They say
Right.
EPA regulations.
Right. And a lot of times, people fall for this nonsense, but the thing is, you can easily deconstruct it if you just take apart that statement and know this. So let's work backwards through it. The idea that the limits mean healthy and safe is wrong. The best example I have is from Pennsylvania, where they were trying to build 2 ethanol biorefineries within 8 miles of each other. Same capacity, one was going to burn waste coal, which is like a dirty version of coal, and one was going to burn natural gas. And in one of the permits, they were both being permitted at the same time, and I'm at the hearing for one of these, and I said, people here are being told that it's healthy and safe to have this limit in your permit. How come healthy and safe for the same industry 8 miles away is 6 times higher? And at that point, and we got this on video too, it's great, they admitted, the regulator told us in the public meeting, it's not based on health and safety. There are technology-based standards. It's based on how much they can actually control a certain pollutant. And they're also scalable. So if you take this healthy and safe level at a plant, which is actually a concentration limit, and you decide, well, instead of a 500 ton per day plant, we're gonna have a 3,000 ton per day trash incinerator, well, they're allowed to put out 6 times more. So it's not healthy and safe. There's nothing health and safety about it. It's just a technology-based standard on what concentration limit is being applied to them. So you can have that plus 10 other polluters next door, and that doesn't matter because their permit is if each one is in a desert or on the moon or something. There's nothing that says this community's got too much pollution so you can't go beyond this line. That's never happening. So health and safety is out the window. That's not the rationale for permit limits. Yes.
I wonder if the lights could go up a little bit. There's such a glare behind you from the brightness that
Oh, okay.
it's draining.
Who is able to access the lights and give us a little more ambient light? Help keep people awake too.
They also admitted that they do an average. They don't do a continuous monitoring.
Right, they don't, and we'll get to that in a second. So working backwards through that statement, they also were saying, thank you, that we'll get fined very heavily if we go over a limit. Well, the fact is that they don't get fined very heavily, and that's evidenced by the fact that they keep paying the same fines every quarter when they give their data on the things they do continuously monitor, and they go over certain limits, and they say, here's the next check. They're not deterring behavior here. Industry is not saying, oh, those fines are too much, we better put this expensive pollution control system in. I've never, ever seen that happen. It just doesn't happen. And it's, I've been 30 years at this. So the biggest lie, though, is continuous emissions monitors. If you really want to catch the emperor with no clothes, ask them this question. Which pollutants are you continuously monitoring? You'll find that there are generally 3, none of the toxic ones, and the technology exists to do this. So for most things coming out of smokestack, if we regulated people on the road driving as if we regulated, or the way we regulate smokestacks, we would let people drive around with no speedometer all year. One day a year we would set a speed trap on the highways, and there would be signs saying, warning, slow down, speed trap ahead. And then the brother of the driver would be running the speed trap because the companies do their own testing. That is seriously what's going on with all smokestacks in this country. It's appalling. And the technology exists to do so much better. These are the ones that they typically do at the top. And then there are a few others that aren't actual pollutants that they'll do as well, so they'll brag about those. But opacity is an indirect way of looking at particulate matter, but it's not actually monitoring it. And oxygen and temperature are not pollutants. But they can continuously monitor all of these and more. There are about 50 or more pollutants that can be continuously monitored. And some places, there are actually 2 incinerators in the US and 1 in Canada now that I know of, that put their emissions data online real time for the world to see. Now they're still just doing a few things, but when the law in Baltimore kicks in, if they don't shut down, which I fully expect Will Bader will do, but if they didn't, they would have to put 20 different pollutants real time on the web with information so you can know how much mercury you're breathing. Because in Baltimore, guess what? Once they were caught, they failed their open book test one year and they had to pay a fine for putting too much mercury into the air. Now, we have no idea how many other days a year, those other 364 days, they're speeding because no one's looking. But they get away with it. And the fact that they can fail an open book test, a best behavior test, is amazing.
Mike, it seems like, I know we heard that Wheelabrator was like 25 pounds of mercury a year, and Lehigh Cement, 25 pounds, like you were saying, and it all accumulates. And if the DEC or the EPA is saying, well, we think this is fine because we brought it up to a whole town discussion, and then, so it's technology standards or decisions, but what about these government agencies that are supposed to be monitoring this stuff? Are they just not doing it?
They require in their permits that they test once a year. Some incinerators, like the one in Baltimore that I've been working on a lot, so I have a lot of examples from there, they have 3 burners. They get to pick which burner they're going to test each year. They only test 1 of the 3 each year. So, I mean, you're basically letting these companies regulate themselves practically, and the state is used to this. All the states operate this way, and it doesn't make it right or good. It just makes it the fact that corporations run our government, and there are revolving doors between industry and government. They know their next better paying job is in the industry they regulate. And they know their bosses, the ones who got appointed to head agencies by governors who take campaign contributions, are probably getting campaign contributions from these industries.
Yes.
And so there are reasons why our agencies are captive in protecting industry from us and not us from industry. And that's why we're taking it into our own hands and working at the local level to set the bar higher like we did in Queens and in Baltimore.
What finally overcame Jimmy Carter's reluctance to help the people who lived at the Love Canal hazardous waste site was a study that showed that 13 out of 17 residents had chromosome damage that was chemical related. Are you doing any connection of health effects to the damage? I mean, we know what dioxin does to people, we know what nitrous oxide does, but do we have studies about people around the incinerators have a higher cancer rate or anything like that?
Actually, I have a slide later on the cancer rate around incinerators. But yes, we do have some of that info. We don't have it for all the places. It's very hard to do those studies. What we do know is X facilities putting out X amount of pollution, and the X is probably higher than what they tell us because of what I just described. And we do know that those pollutants cause a certain amount of damage in health. What's very hard to do is go from A to B and then B to C at the same time. We can go from A to B and we can go from B to C, but if we go to A to C and say this facility caused this much health damage, it's almost impossible to do a study like that because people move, the pollutants move, they get into the food supply, some go as far as the Canadian Arctic or go to food things that are shipped all around the country, so the health impacts are diffused around. And there are other sources of pollution, so you can't just study one industry when they're surrounded by other polluters too and be able to say it was them. So it's very hard to do those kinds of studies credibly, which is why we need to go based on our common sense from what we do know from A to B and B to C without pretending we're going to get great A to C studies that say this plant killed this person, because you just can't get good stuff like that. But the other thing that won in Love Canal, it wasn't studies that were the whole story. There were also housewives who took an EPA director hostage in their house for days. Okay? There was serious activism that happened around that. And that was a big part of it too, trust me.
So, Mike, I just want to say that our next program is on June 10th, also a Monday night, and it's with Dr. David Carpenter, who is an environmental health scientist and very well-known scientist. He'll be speaking about air pollution and human health. So save your questions for next month.
All right, so
Okay, one of the
one more question and we'll keep
Yeah,
going.
one of the problems I'm just stating is that the DEC feels that we're in an industrial zone, and that we need to tolerate this kind of pollution because we're in an industrial zone. And when you tell them that people live here, they go on dead ears. Just a statement.
Yeah, sure. Okay, lots of places like that. So, all right. So incinerators versus landfills. Let's get squarely into that issue now. So, like I said earlier, it's landfills versus both, because you still have to put the toxic ash somewhere, and there are folks in Catskill fighting the next ash dump right now. Right now, you're just dumping your ash in Colony Landfill in Albany County. So the real issue is whether you're going to have a landfill or an incinerator with a smaller, more toxic landfill. And what kills people is not the size of waste, it's the toxicity. And so I would rather have a bigger landfill full of unburned trash than live next to an ash dump with more toxic ash in it. And so you're not doing anyone favors by saying, let's burn it first. That's not helping anyone. So the real answer is zero waste and minimizing the landfill.
So when you talk about a toxic ash landfill, you mean they just dig a hole, they put it in, and they cover it over?
Or they find a hole that's already dug, like in Catskill, which is an old cement quarry, and they want to dump it in there.
Limestone,
They
yeah.
just into the water and
Yes, right on the Hudson.
Oh,
Yeah, which is why Riverkeeper is leading the fight on that a lot right now.
Don't they have to be lined, the ash landfills or any landfill?
Yeah, newer ones do. I'm not sure how much they're going to line this quarry, but yeah, the idea is they're supposed to line them. But all landfill liners leak eventually, and eventually it could be from day one, but definitely by year 20 they're leaking. So that's not something to sleep well at night with.
Yeah, and that's the general problem with landfills,
Right.
and, you know, that's some of the logic that led to incinerators.
Yeah.
We have a landfill on Bridge Road
Mhm.
that's closed. When I moved in the community, our trash was buried there. Also, the toxic waste from Hercules Incorporated, some people may remember that. We had to line that landfill, and then we closed it. So, there is that trade-off.
Yeah.
Well, and
But that's right over the Jenkinsville aquifer.
Sure.
People who get their water, anybody from Jenkinsville? Get their water from the aquifer right under the landfill.
Oh,
So that's even more reason not to put ash in landfills, because that's gonna do more damage to groundwater than if you put it in the trash without burning it
Well,
first.
the ash from incinerator.
Right, so let's get into that. So incinerator ash, the reason why I have coffee grounds on here is because if you take coffee beans and pour water over them, you're not gonna get coffee, right? But if you grind them up and increase their surface area, you pour